Today is April 7th, 2021, and the Lane County Board of Commissioners are continuing a meeting that was recessed yesterday afternoon. We are on item 1 of our Wednesday, April 7th, 2021 agenda, and 1A is Public Works. It's order 21-04-07-01 in the matter of amending Chapter 60 of the Lane Manual to establish a permit fee waiver program within the Land Management Division for survivors of the Holiday Farm fire. And to lead us through this discussion prior to taking action are Dan Hurley, Keir Miller, and Matt McRae. Dan?
All right. Good morning, Chair Bernie. Thank you, Commissioners, for your time here this morning. Looking forward to continuing the conversation we started last week, and just appreciate your support in looking at adding staff to Land Management Division to staff up for processing the many permits that will be coming in as a result of the Holiday Farm fire, and your support for the community to want to waive fees. You know, clearly we want to help the residents out there in whatever way we can. We continue to have conversations on this. Keir's worked really hard to get something to you with a quick turnaround. We've had some equity conversations, as you did last week, and maybe Keir will touch on that. And there are also some perhaps unintended consequences that might undermine some of the environmental outcomes we were trying to achieve with some incentives. So I'm hoping Keir will touch on that as well. This does make me a little nervous that we're looking at adding staff without having resources coming into land management to support that. And I know that the board is committed and the county administrator is committed to helping us identify those resources for the long term. But the Land Management Division has worked very hard over the last probably 10 years to build up their reserves for the event of an economic downturn that will come at some point. So I'm worried about depleting those, but I know that we'll have additional conversations to try to identify resources for these added positions. So with that, I'll pass to Keir, and he'll go through the proposal in more detail. Thanks, Keir.
Thanks, Dan, and thank you, Chair Bernie. Good morning, Commissioners. So really, the order before you today reflects, we believe, the direction we received from the board last Wednesday. At that point, you all had a fairly robust discussion about permit fee waivers for survivors of the Holiday Farm fire. I won't spend a lot of time going through the details because I'll just hit the highlights of it. There was, again, good discussion around this, so I think these concepts will be familiar. So the order before you would essentially establish a permit fee waiver program for survivors of the Holiday Farm fire. The program would go into effect with enactment of the ordinance, and it would be in effect for 5 years, at which time it would sunset in September of 2025. The program would be applicable for individuals rebuilding a residence that was lost in the fire. The permits that would be waived would include all building permits, including electrical, inspections, mechanical permits, anything associated with the replacement of a dwelling, as well as associated septic permits for on-site sanitation systems that may be required. We've also proposed in this language that land use permitting, the front-end land use permitting process be waived as well, and that would include the land use review of the site plan and any preliminary permits that may be required, including the floodplain development permit, fill permit, an initial riparian declaration permit, a type 1 legal lot land use decision, and of course, a lot of the structures that were lost upriver were what we refer to as temporary hardship manufactured homes, and that's a planning application as well. So we're proposing to waive fees on those hardship dwellings as well. The program, based on direction we had last week, would be applicable to the original owners of the property at the time the house was destroyed. And it would also, we propose that it can be transferable to immediate family members of the individual if the property is conveyed Since the time it was destroyed and a new owner is related to the original owner, this would allow permits to be waived for those individuals as well. Finally, the program would be retroactive, meaning that anybody who's applied for a building permit and paid a fee since the fire would be qualify for reimbursement, and we would reimburse requests for permits paid that qualify under this program. Those are the highlights. Again, I think this reflects the majority of the direction we received. We do understand there are a couple issues remaining, which Dan alluded to, which I just want to highlight for you. The first is the question of equity. As you all know, Lane County is approaching recovery efforts in the McKenzie through an equity lens. Obviously, there is a broader discussion that needs to happen around that, especially in terms of, broader recovery efforts, housing, permitting. My understanding is that the disaster recovery manager, public works director, will be returning to the board with a more thorough discussion on how we, the actions and policies and priorities that are set for recovery efforts upriver are viewed holistically through that equity lens. Obviously, this program that we've developed is applicable across the board to any homeowners who lost a property. So we believe it's widely available and equitable in that sense. But of course, there are ways, should the board choose to, that this program could be tailored or limited to, for example, owners of the, owner occupiers of residences and not rental properties. A lot of that was discussed last week. So the proposal before you does include options for, any residence that was destroyed, including vacation rentals, and second dwellings, et cetera. The other issue, which we just had, again, the disaster recovery manager and myself met with representatives from EWEB yesterday. And, they were speaking with us about an incentive program that EWEB is currently undertaking, where they are providing funding for residents who are in that kind of critical area right along the river in the riparian area. They're actually offering incentives to individuals who are rebuilding to try to get them to move their structures a little bit further away from the river and the riparian area. For obvious ecological benefits, they're interested in seeing septic systems move further away from the river to protect water quality. They did bring up the point that they have some thoughts that they'd like to explore further and some potential concerns with this permit fee waiver program, and that the proposal before you would waive permit fees for houses regardless of whether or not they're to be replaced in the riparian area. And also it would waive fees for floodplain development permits. There was some concern there that the county may be incentivizing development in these sensitive areas. We understand that there is general recognition from the community and the board that assistance is needed right away. We just wanted to sort of daylight this potential issue for you. If this is something the board's interested in exploring further and you choose to take action on the proposed order before you, staff would be happy to come back at a later date, kind of outline in more detail some of the thoughts and ideas that EWEB shared with us. With that, I will end the discussion on the permit fee waiver question item, and we can talk, I guess, when we open up discussion on the staffing question, which are presented as separate board orders, we can have that discussion then. So I'm available for questions should you have them. Thank you.
Are there commissioners that have questions or comments or discussion items? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair. But just a clarification, Kerry, you went through that very quickly, and I was trying to keep up on the notes. I can always look at the replay, but regarding owner-occupied, not rental, what exactly did you say about that?
The program would apply to both owner-occupied and rentals, second homes, vacation homes.
Then I got it correctly. Thank you.
Commissioner Buck. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to express my support. I think the materials you provided for us today really encompass everything that we spoke about last week, and it looks like a very good proposal. I would encourage my fellow board members to pass these orders that are presented to us today. On the eWeb issue, which I found out about just a couple days ago, I absolutely understand the incentive package that they've put in play to find ways in which people might be willing to move a little bit further away from our waterways. However, and I would like to explore that further if there's ways that we could possibly create those incentives in an alternative fashion. I do want to just remind people that people who lost their homes out of no fault of their own may live in these areas, and I think they deserve a right to be able to rebuild in the location in which they originally lost their home. It would be wonderful to try to find ways in which that is more ecologically sound further away, but I don't want to put that in as a hurdle for them to rebuild where their original home was, that they never intended to rebuild. And they would have probably lived there for many, many years after them, or another family after that. So I would just like to encourage us to continue on the path that we are on with these orders as written, and also work with eWeb to find maybe alternative incentives through that program, and we can explore that as more discussions unfold. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I appreciate Commissioner Buck's comments and support them and working backwards from the last one. I trust having, even though I haven't been here very long, the conversations I've had so far with staff from this division gives me great trust that they will do what they can to kind of find that happy medium, or find as many opportunities to mitigate negative environmental impacts while also holding that first priority of helping folks rebuild and get back home. To that end, I wanted to just follow up a little bit on Commissioner Farr's clarification that this would cover all homes. And I wondered if there's been discussion or opportunity to think about prioritization, because while the waiver will cover everyone, how we prioritize the work could really impact the timing of who gets to rebuild a primary residence, whether that's occupied by a renter or a homeowner, versus a second home or vacation home. So I wonder if any consideration has been given to how we might operationally structure the program to ensure we're prioritizing from a timing perspective, not from a thumbs up or down, whether they get the waiver perspective, to prioritize residents of the community before those second homes. Thank you.
Keir, would you like to respond to that, or no?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Commissioner Trieger. So the issue of prioritization, we have thought about that, and our hope is that, especially if additional staff are brought on board, we will be able to process permits through the system as they come in. That's our intent, and that there shouldn't be sort of a delay or a backlog if somebody provides a complete submittal package. When that happens, we are generally able to issue that permit, as we discussed last week, in 3 weeks or less. So we're certainly not at the point where we're having to compete amongst complete submittals. We're trying to get complete submittals in the door, and then we can process them quickly. So I appreciate the comments. I don't know that it's going to be a huge concern, especially if there are additional staff. The other point is that we do our long-standing practice. It's not a formalized policy anywhere, but it makes sense, is that first application in is first application out. However, we do have flexibility in that regard. I don't know that it needs to be codified within the proposal before you. If there was board direction that we would want to see, the land management focus first on primary residences when there's a conflict, and secondary residences after that. If we receive direction from that today, I believe we could implement that policy without a change to the manual.
Commissioner Trieger, did you have anything else? No. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. And Kira, thanks very much for this great presentation. I wanted to make 2 quick points. One is how remarkably fast you're able to process all of the information that you received from the board, plus before that in 1 week, and give us such a thorough presentation. It's impressive. And when you say that you're able to turn permits around within 3 weeks, wow, that is pretty impressive. So congratulations on all of that work. I realize the real work is ahead of you here. All you did today was prepare a report. The work is the boots on the ground, and I mean later supporting the additional staffing, of course. The second thing that I want to point out, Chair, is something that we think about quite often, but we don't have a plan to respond to. In addition to the permitted houses, the permitted residences that were destroyed during the fire, we know that many off the Bucks residences were destroyed also. These are residences that cannot be rebuilt by permit because they weren't there to begin with on paper. But we know that many people were living there by the permission of the owner of the property in non-permitted dwellings. We know this. We don't know how many, and we don't know how we're going to respond to those folks who have lost their homes, beyond the people who lost the homes that are, once again, permitted on and either owned or rented up the river. Nothing I'm suggesting that we do about this point. Just remember that that did add to our rolls of homelessness in the community, that we do have people who are homeless due to this, who have no recourse that we have prescribed at this point.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is there any other commissioner that would like to weigh in on this? Commissioner Buck? Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Buck, I saw your hand first.
That's okay. If there's another person that wants to speak, I'll wait. I was just going to make a motion when we're ready.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I just noticed Commissioner Bozovich's hand up.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I first I wanted to state I fully support doing everything we can to get the fire victims their permits as quickly as possible. And I fully support the additional staff and all that. But I just kind of want to remind the board, we've had 20 FTE in this department in the 13-14 budget, 32 in the 17-18. And in our last adopted budget, it was 37. So we have been steadily increasing the FTE in this department with the thought that that was going to help shorten permit times and expedite permitting. And I had 37 probably doesn't include what was added I think there were 3 FTE that we added last year to try and help with fire victims. So there's been a significant increase in staff in this department. So we're talking about another 7 FTE. My concern as we do this, and I'm starting to hear this from constituents, is they're being told that their permits that are non-fire related are being set aside to work on fire victims' permits. We have to do something that prevents that. In particular, I know of one person that's been trying to get a permit for over 2 years that was told recently that their permit was being set aside. And there are lots of reasons why it's taken 2 years. They had a land watch appeal they had to run all the way up through Luba and trying to get legal for their F2 property. But those people, there is some equity issues around that. So that's one of the reasons why I fully support the staffing up. But I don't want to lose sight of that. And I also just don't want to lose sight of the fact that we still next to homeless camps right now, my #1 constituent complaint is processing of planning and building permits. Used to be marijuana grows. It's changed drastically, over the last couple of years. So I just don't want us to lose sight of that these people that aren't fire victims still have, and some of them have been in the process well before the fire ever happened and are still without permits. And part of it is it's complex to try and get a permit outside of a UGB in this state. We've made it complex, and all the planning stuff that comes before you ever even get to submit a building permit. And then once you finally get a, agreed upon complete building permit submittal, there's the 3-week wait there. I'd like to see as part of this that like our report backs that we're getting on COVID, the report backs we're getting on other things, I'd like to see a regular report back from LMD that lists, maybe every other month, number of permits submitted in that time, number of permits issued, and the time and process. And not just building permits, because from the first submittal to when somebody's deemed complete, sometimes is quite often a long period. And then maybe if there is a time and process from deemed complete to issue, to be nice to know. But one of the things I'm greatly concerned about is submittals go in, and it's sometimes months before somebody hears back that their submittal was incomplete. And then there's a back and forth to try to get to a complete submittal is taking long periods of time. I realize some of that is COVID related, and the fact that we're not having people help people in the door with their permits, and then it takes so long for a package to actually come to rise to the being looked at for completeness by a staff person. But we've got to do something about this in general, because we're talking about a department that's more than doubled in FTE in the last 7 years, and yes, it may be some reorganization that's taken some of that, but we really need to get this up to speed. At the same time, I'm aware of a bill with a -1 amendment, House Bill 2289, that may greatly shortcut at least the planning side of fire reconstruction. It'll basically do what Chair Burney was wondering about last week about grandfathering, and eliminate the planning portions of the fire rebuilding process. But it's in the legislature. It's only had a hearing. The work session's not scheduled till the 19th. And it's only in the House side right now. It's still got to get through the full House, through the full Senate process, and get signed by the governor. So that may be a long time yet to come. So in this short period of time, I want to say I fully support the additional staff, but I think we need to start hearing regular reports and understand and have some accountability back on some of these time periods on processing. Because anecdotally, I'm not hearing 3 weeks, even from complete complete packages.
Commissioner Buck, before you make a motion, can Mr. Miller respond to Commissioner Bozovich's? Okay, thank you. Yes, go ahead, Kieran.
Thank you, Chair Burney, and thank you for the comments, Commissioner Bozovich. I want to mention that prior to COVID and the holiday farm fire, the land management division, I know Dan and Steve are both very interested in improving timelines and permitting, and as well as I am. We've been developing some KPIs, some key performance indicators to look at just the sort of things that you're interested in, tracking timelines. We have been working with TS to develop some Tableau software dashboards and tools that could be available to the public that tracks permit application timelines, where permits are at in the process. That's something I want to be transparent about. I want to get that information out to the public. I want them to understand what the timeline periods are. As I know you're aware, we have statutory deadlines that we have to meet on the planning side. We have a 30-day completeness turnaround for the time an application comes in the door to deem it complete or to issue, a letter saying these are the missing items, which is, our goal and what we routinely target and meet that goal. As far as the holiday farm fire packages are concerned, our internal goal is a 5-day turnaround with review in the door of what's necessary. And, early on that maybe we're a couple of weeks out, but now I can tell you most of these submittals come in the door. They're assigned a permit coordinator, a one-on-one person that works on that permit with the applicant. We aim to turn around and get them comments within 5 days. And usually it's a couple of days, at least in the last month or so, since we've been hearing a lot of these concerns. I do appreciate the concerns. I'll say that land management division, was decimated by the last economic downturn. And 20 FTE, while it's much less than we have now, that wasn't a functional division. It really, I mean, we were just barely getting by. And the 37 positions that we now have, they do include the 3 positions that the board added last year. And really, this division has been lean for so many years. And I think that honestly, when we look at some of our comparable counties and the staff that they have on board, the work that our staff's able to do is impressive. But I understand there is a desire to see faster timelines, faster turnarounds. And as I know you're aware, Commissioner Bozovich, much of what delays our process is the very effective watchdog advocacy groups that we have in Lane County. And that simply doesn't exist in some other counties. I mean, we are scrutinized. Every decision that we issue that can be scrutinized is looked at, and we have to respond to those comments. And frankly, it delays the land use portion of the process. And I wish that wasn't the case, but that is the system that's set up. That's why we have, the board, the state provides 6 months to work through that land use decision process. That's a long time. People don't want to wait that long, but that's what's available in the statutes. And we routinely bump up into that because of appeals. And we're certainly trying to work the appeal process, limit the number of appeals, provide more certainty to applicants. But it's a challenge, and I appreciate that you're aware of that, and we are working to try to improve those timelines.
Okay, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move approval of Order 21-04-07-01 as presented.
I'd like to second that.
Okay, as I get back to the agenda here, it has been moved by Commissioner Buck and seconded by Commissioner Farr. Order 21-04-07-01. Is there discussion to the motion? Commissioner Farr.
Only to say this, Chair Bernie, some very important points were raised by Commissioner Bozovich, and I saw a lot of head nods and intent watching as Keir provided his response. We wrote down everything, Keir, and thank you very much for that response. That's all, Joe. It's being watched by a lot of people right now. There's not just Land Watch watching the permit department. There are a lot of people watching the permitting department, in no small part people who are waiting for their permits to be approved. Thank you.
Are there any additional comments to the motion? Then I have a couple of comments. One, are these positions in this motion sunsetted so that we may have the ability to utilize some of the dollars coming in to offload the cost to the county?
So Chair Bernie, the order before you right now actually doesn't include the addition for the staff. That'll be in the following board item, but it does not include a sunset clause. However, the positions are being posted this week. They'll be posted on Friday, and they do include language in the postings that these are temporary duration postings. So individuals who are brought in are aware that, it's funding dependent and need dependent.
No, that answers that question. Thank you. And do you have in the materials as it relates to this specific board order, is there any way to guesstimate the range of what this waiver will cost Lane County?
There is, Chair Bernie, and it's linked. Your packet before you doesn't have a detailed financial explanation, but there's a link within that packet that points to last week's memo, and there's a pretty detailed discussion of the fees and the costs that could be basically not the funding that wouldn't be realized by the division. Again, as we mentioned last week, this is funding that we didn't budget for, that we didn't anticipate being in our budget. But if we just look at the numbers, and if we calculate that roughly half the people are going to rebuild, and the county waives permitting fees on those applications, it's about, depending on how you look at it, $2.1 to $2.3 million in revenue that wouldn't be realized by the county.
So this is a major commitment by this body to help in any way we possibly can the victims of that natural disaster, rebuild as quickly as possible, and try and defer whatever costs the county is able, or in this case, perhaps even unable yet to absorb to do that. Is that correct here?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Thank you. And in my understanding, Commissioner Bozovich, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are probably voting for this. And really the large amount of your conversation really dealt with in operational issues that you feel at some point we ought to also be discussing. Is that correct? Okay. Is there any more discussion to the motion? Hearing and seeing none. Order 21-04-07-01 in the matter of amending Chapter 60 of the Lane Manual to establish a permit fee waiver program within the Land Management Division for survivors of the Holiday Farm fire has been made by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Farr. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Let the record show that this motion has passed unanimously 5-0. Thank you very much. Item 1B, Order 21-04-07-02 in the matter of adding 6 full-time positions in Fund 570 within the Department of Public Works to prioritize and expedite permits necessary for Holiday Farm fire recovery efforts. Again, Mr. Hurley and Mr. Miller.
Go ahead, Kier.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Chair Bernie. So again, this order would, should the board enact it, would implement 6 new FTE within the Land Management Division with this purpose of expediting permits related to the Holiday Farm fire. One of the positions would be a permit navigator position. Funding for that position has been secured. That position would act as an ombudsman of sort, assisting directly residents who are trying to navigate the complex permitting process. The other 5 positions would be frontline staff who would be working on the land use and building permit applications and sanitation applications to move them through the system. I'll point out that following the board's direction last week, it seemed like there is urgency around this issue, and we requested pre-approval to begin recruitment for these positions and was granted that by the county administrator and the Budget and Finance Office. If the board chooses not to approve these positions, no offers would be made on that to the applicants. As I mentioned, these positions are already in the pipeline for recruitment. It takes about a week for HR to turn those around. They will be posted this Friday, and we also are in the process of hiring other staff in land management. We've had some really good applicant pools for some of those other positions, and we're hoping that we can look back into those pools and bring some of those qualified people on board quickly, and then bring them through our training process. We do have a good process in place for onboarding staff. These are complex issues, especially on the planning side, and it can take some time to train individuals. But we also think we can train these folks on the specific application types, not the whole broad range of application types, but the specific ones necessary to help expedite permits in the McKenzie River. And that's what our goal is, to bring these positions on board, have them focus directly on the permits needed for timely processing. So with that, staff's recommendation is that the board propose the order as presented with the 6 FTE outlined. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Yes, I see Vice Chair Farr's hand up, so it is time for commissioners to weigh in. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't intend to jump the queue, but I do have a couple of quick questions here regarding, I'm in support of this, and I'll second whoever makes the motion. I think it'd be appropriate for Chair Buck to make the motion when the, former Chair Buck to make the motion when that's time. But regarding the, how these positions will be applied, we have the navigate, and the others will be applied to, as they come on board, to expedite permitting and to move things through the system quickly. You've talked about a 30-day guideline in general, or a 30-day requirement in general that permits are returned. And then you talk about a first in, first out. My question is regarding first in, first out. I didn't get the full clarification on how that is going to be applied in this process, because Commissioner Trigger had questions regarding prioritization of owners versus rental properties, etc. So my question there is on first in, first out. And we know that some permits are from all over the county are in the process. Some of them have been waiting, as we know, a year, 2 years, for whatever reason. If a permit is from up the Mackenzie and it actually falls within the holiday farm fire guidelines, if it's an existing permit, is that considered to be first in? Does that get turned out before the other permits that are submitted after that? And how does first in, first out apply in general? Realizing once again, Keir, that the work has just begun and things will change as you process. You can't foresee the future entirely, but how do you see first in, first out working? Based on the new positions, by the way, that we have added to the expedite system. Pardon my interruption.
Sure. So we envision that, with the addition of these additional staff, that permit applicants in the rest of the county we'll be able to respond to those permits in a timely manner. I mean, just to be clear, when the board directed staff to prioritize holiday farm fire permits back in November, that was our direction. That's what we began to do. We're not telling individuals that your permit's on hold. We're not even touching it if they're not in the Mackenzie Valley. That's not accurate.
My question was regarding permits that are specifically from the fire area, not from the rest of the county. How does first in, first out apply to those? Not from West Lane County or wherever, just from up there. Pardon my interruption, Chair.
Thanks for the clarification. I guess as I was trying to articulate to Commissioner Trigger's point, we're obviously going to process those permits however the board directs. That's a policy choice. Should you want us to prioritize the owner occupiers above secondary residences, we can do that. Our current process is not to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, it's generally the first complete application in. That's what we're trying to process, but that's certainly policy that the board could provide right now. Policy direction, excuse me.
And I will wait for discussion on that, Chair Bernie, but my question very specifically was if a permit was existent prior to the fire from the area outside of the district, does that go as a first in, first out on your regular policy, not on a specially directed board policy?
Yes, it would. It would fall under that.
Thank you. That's all I need. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Mokrahisi, were you wanting to provide clarification or no?
Well, I just want to make sure, because I think I understand Commissioner Farr's question, and there was this question, I think Keir was trying to address this, that there are permits that are outside of the fire area, and the concern, I think, and I think this is what Commissioner Farr was indicating, is are those permits first in, first out? And I think what Keir, is that not right?
No, I was not talking about permits outside of the fire area, Mr. Mokrahisi, just ones inside the fire area, which is what today's business is about.
Okay.
Commissioner Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 points, not to belabor, but I really want it to be explicit and clear. And I think it would be helpful if we would use primary residence as a term instead of renter versus owner occupied, because my point and my purpose is that folks who live there as their permanent home, whether it's a renter or an owner occupied, my suggestion in the conversation I was starting was whether we can prioritize the applicants to rebuild dwellings that are primary residences versus vacation or second home. Very different from trying to prioritize owner occupied versus renters. And so that's very important to me that we are all speaking that same language. The second piece is just a quick question about the permit navigator. It almost seems to me that's a position that's going to be helpful sort of no matter what and anywhere and forever and ever, amen, in the department, because it's complicated, and particularly when someone has lost their home due to a disaster, they're under extra stress, but it's complex. And I wondered if how that person, just one person, to what extent will they be limited to strictly helping navigate the county's permitting process? Because as I understand, folks are also facing a lot of barriers and challenges for application for assistance to FEMA, for example, and sometimes help and resources being denied because of very simple typos, or they didn't order the pages properly or something like that. So I'm just curious how that position will be put to best use, but not overwhelmed, but give the most help, and what the scope of that, how prescribed the scope of that position is.
I think, Dan, would you like to respond?
Yes, Commissioner, I could speak to that. 2 points. One is that we did add a position prior to the fire that is supervising our technicians, that sort of acts as an ombudsman and helping people through the permit process outside of the fire area. At the second point, that gets at more of our work around disaster case management, of helping people through the FEMA process. So Laurel O'Rourke has been helping people through that process in collaboration with ODHS. And we are anticipating receiving soon additional staff of 4 FTE to assist with disaster case management. So we'll be able to do more of that work for the survivors.
Terrific, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mokrohysky.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to take that. We've talked a little bit about this and appreciate the comments from various commissioners and Commissioner Bozovich kind of flagging some of the history here of staffing going back. I mean, it is important to note, I think that, we have increased staffing in land management, but it's also important to note that we still, in many regards, are understaffed for the workload, and the challenges that exist in this body of work here in Lane County are in many ways unique to other jurisdictions. So I wanted to just hit the kind of, Keir and Dan and I talked about this morning before the work session, these 5 areas that we face that really create this general, the general challenges that we deal with. One, the existing state land use laws that make it more difficult. The laws exist not to make it easy to develop in unincorporated areas, but frankly, to make it easier to develop within the urban growth boundary than outside of the urban growth boundary. So those state land use laws are a constraint that we face that exists. 2, as Keir mentioned, the land use advocates and the challenges that we face. Those challenges, and we have a very, we deal with a lot of that here in Lane County. Those challenges that we face, those legal challenges, and create a need for our staff to not just focus on the demand from our customers, but to actually respond to those land use challenges that we get from advocates. So that's 2. 3 is the understaffing. And with an appreciation of the fact that we have increased staffing over the past 7 years, we still are challenged with understaffing. 4 is COVID. So there were a lot of improvements that land management were beginning to make in the customer service center to begin to improve the timeliness of our processing, right? And those were starting to take hold and show some benefit. And then COVID hit, right? And we had to do the remote work thing. And so remote work is not ideal for processing and dealing with customers, much more ideal to deal with people in person and resolve multiple challenges than to have to do emails and phone back and forth. That's 4. And 5, as we're talking about here, is the Holiday Farm fire. Massive historic wildland fire that destroyed hundreds of homes, that is now creating a glut of work that we demand that we have to get right. So I just wanted to highlight that we're talking about sort of, one piece of this, or 2 pieces of it, which is dealing with some staffing constraints to address the Holiday Farm fire issue. But there are these 5 areas that really circle around, that create these general frustrations for everyone, for all of you as policymakers, for residents who are trying to come through and get planning and permitting decisions, for our staff who want to help people get through this process. So I want to just then put a nail in this to Commissioner Trieger's comment that I think is really important, that we're, just as we viewed COVID, we didn't want a global pandemic to hit our community and our country and all the impacts but we've talked a lot with this board and with our staff about let's not waste a pandemic here. Don't waste a crisis, because there's actually opportunity within a crisis to do some new things, test out how it goes, and then catapult us into a better situation as a result of that. The same can be true as we look at land management, both with COVID and with the Holiday Farm fire. So when we talk about this navigator position, and again, to Commissioner Trieger's point, there may be things here, and we sort of anticipate there are going to be things we're testing right now, particularly related to the Holiday Farm fire, that might work. And we go, oh, maybe we do need to incorporate funding this longer term, and we're going to have that conversation. But I think we're very much, as Dan and Keir have said, and I will lend myself to this, we are all very committed to not only getting the Holiday Farm fire recovery work right, but to continuing to work on how we can improve our permitting and planning processes and customer service going forward.
Thank you, Pseudo Commissioner Mokrahysky. No, thanks, Steve. Are there any other commissioner comments or inputs? Before a motion is made, I would like, if I may, to state that from my perception, much of this conversation, including what I absolutely personally agree with, which is prioritizing primary residences, but nonetheless, much of this is really dealing with operational issues that we are going to continue to revisit. I think the motion on the floor now relates to adding 6 full-time positions. While I also agree with Mr. Mokrahysky that we can use this to test things that will have implications for long-term improvements, I would like to entertain a motion for the order that is on the floor. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you so much, Chair. And before I make that motion, I want to extend my gratitude to the rest of the board for your support. This is a significant investment in the McKenzie region, and it will make a big difference for people who are currently and in the future going through the rebuilding process. This is something that is really desperately needed in order to jumpstart that rebuilding process. So thank you very much for your support. And I would like to move order number 21-04-07-02 as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Thank you.
Order 21-04-07-02 has been made by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Farr. Is there discussion to the motion? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. And I feel terrible that I'm hogging the seconds on this, because I believe that the entire board is in full support of, as you stated, Commissioner Buck, that we're all in support of the effort of the McKenzie, in no small part because it can be a harbinger of an improved process for the rest of the county as we work through this process in an expedited fashion. I'm hoping and convinced that we will find ways to expedite our general operations in the department. So thank you for Chair Bernie. Thank you for your work on this. Chair Buck, thank you for former Chair Buck. Thank you for your work. And once again, I apologize for hogging the seconds because we're all in support of this.
Vice Chair Farr has apologized for hogging the seconds, although he doesn't feel so bad that it stopped him from doing that. I'm just kidding you. Commissioner Butt, did you have your hand up?
I did, thank you. I wanted to add the fact that I did personally deliver a letter to both the House and Senate wildfire committees, signed by all 7 chairs of wildfire affected communities for funding for both the previous motion and this one as well. And I believe that that is being significantly considered by that committee. And as soon as I hear back, I will make sure to let everybody know. I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to recover some resources for that, but you never know until they make their decision and notify you. Just want to make sure that that was clear, that we are not doing this without actively looking for significant resources to make the county whole.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Bozovich. Commissioner Bozovich, I'm not complaining, but we can't hear you.
First, I wanted to state I'll be voting in favor of the motion, but I want to just kind of compare what we're doing now today with how we responded to COVID, how we responded to other emergencies with this county. You know, we didn't wait for the board to ask for, you know, public health to provide us a proposal to staff up to do contact tracing when COVID started. We didn't ask, you know, wait for the board to come up with a request to staff to figure out how we were going to do mass vax clinics. You know, our staff understood we were in a crisis, responded, and provided those proposals. You know, here we are 7 months after the fires, and we're finally starting to deal with how we're going to process all the permits. You know, I just want to put that in context, because it seems like in so many other cases, we respond to crisis so well. And staff is the one that comes to us with the proposals and says, this is what we ought to be doing. Or we're doing this, by the way, if you don't like that we're doing it, tell us, you know, we'll stop. And we've made use of all sorts of funding streams to supply the additional staff. And we pulled staff from other departments into public health to do that additional contact tracing. And, you know, so it's like, you know, where have we grabbed people from other departments and put them into land management to deal with this workload? You know, so that's kind of, you know, one of my frustrations I'm just going to express here. Second, I just want to read for the board just one of the communications I received recently, and this one was in writing rather than a phone call. We are, you know, Lane County Commissioner Bozovich, we are writing to ask you for your assistance with our remodeling building permit. We applied for our permit on October 1st, 2020. We received an email Friday, March 26, 2021, telling us our permit is now months away from completion due to prioritization of building permits for those impacted by the Holiday Farm fire. We have great sympathy for everyone impacted by the Holiday Farm fire. However, we want to be certain you are aware of people like us who are experiencing financial hardship due to our building permit being delayed. The home we own has plumbing issues, and which make it impossible for us to continue living there. We are currently living in a rental while our home is waiting to be remodeled. Each month we pay rent is a financial burden. We are asking that you contact the Lane County Planning Department to be sure people like us are not forgotten. That's somebody's primary residence. You know, that's the kind of communications I'm starting to see from folks. And they were contacted in writing by an email to tell them that their permit was being delayed. Not that they're not, you know, it didn't say it's not being worked on, but it definitively said your permit's not going to be issued anytime soon because. So I hope that with the addition of this 6 FTE and the direction from this board to do everything we did for COVID around building permits, that we don't drop everything else we're doing. We didn't drop protecting people from meningitis and measles, et cetera, while we were working on COVID. Our public health department kept that kind of, you know, work up. We need to keep all the permits moving, and we need to do something to make this a priority. We have to move staff around, add overtime. I don't care. I want to see us deal with this crisis like we were dealing with COVID.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other Commissioner Buck?
I wanted just like to respond to that particular comment. Ever since the Holiday Farm fire occurred, the county has gone above and beyond to do as much as we can, as fast as possible, to help people recover. I don't want people who are watching today to think that we haven't done anything for the last 7 or 8 months. We have done a significant amount of work in a pandemic to get resources out to the community as fast as possible, not only within the fire at the time, but continually. I've been head deep working on response efforts ever since the fire occurred. And I want to commend many of our staff in a variety of departments who have done a significant amount of work to get out to the community and help them recover. It's a very traumatic event. We have had health officials, not only the planning department, who's been working to get more staff and find ways in which to find resources to do exactly what we're doing today. But we've had the sheriff's office step up, being able to add patrol. We've had folks all up and down the state level, our local representatives, our congressional representatives, our governor, our wildfire committees, all working on this together. I've been working with counties across the state who are all going through the exact same issues that we are going through at the same time, all trying to get to the same resources to help their communities as we are. Yes, we do need to do more work. There's going to be a long haul in front of us. But I just want to remind everybody on the board of how much work has gone into the recovery and rebuilding process so far, and that we will continue to push forward to break down barriers and to find ways in which to get folks back to the place in which they were from prior to the fire. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Are there any other commissioners that would like to make a comment at this point? Mr. Mokrahysky.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be brief. I just wanted to add a little bit of context to the work that has led up to this effort. I think it is important to note that in terms of our emergency response to the fire, of course, when the fire happened, we pulled together an emergency air operations center. We pulled staff together from across the organization and the community that existed for several months in the immediate response and the initial recovery work. We have since, Mr. Hurley, who took over as the incident commander of that effort, has done a great job of creating various groups that focus on different pieces of the recovery effort. We've created the position and hired Matt McRae as our long-term recovery manager. And so what we're talking about here is one piece, and the board I know appreciates this, one piece of the overall recovery and rebuilding in the fire-affected area. But I think we've been an organization for the past year, over a year now, that has been managing multiple crises. And I'm really proud of the staff and the leaders in this organization of how we've managed and responded to those various crises. It has not been without challenge and without missteps and needed improvements along the way. And that's true for COVID as well. There have been various pieces of the COVID emergency response that have not been perfect from the start, that we've had to adjust and work on. I will say finally that what's in front of you today did not happen overnight. So we have been working on this plan for several weeks, and I would say probably several months here, that we've been working and having conversations about what really is needed. The concept of a navigator and ombudsman did not fall out of the sky. The specific number of staff needed and the structure of all of this has been in the works. And so are we to the end? No. Have we achieved the result that we seek to achieve? No. So this action by the board, these actions by the board today are a step in that process. And I would be the first one to acknowledge we are not where we need to be. We have a lot of work to do to address the needs of the residents in the communities that have been affected by this fire. And we're committed to doing that work, but today is an important step in that process.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? This conversation has gone so long. We are speaking to the motion, correct? The motion that's been made? Okay, then I would like to say I'd like to weigh in a bit. I think that there are times where criticizing and bringing attention to inequity is important. I think there are times where stable stewardship is important. And I think during crises, the stable stewardship this board and the staff have provided in attempting to respond has been extraordinary. I think we all could label some of Commissioner Bozovich's desires as it relates to permitting, to which I agree. I mean, but to also to patrols in the county, to the amount of staff we have devoted to assisting those that want to invest in renewable energy to incent that. I don't think we have enough staff as it relates to assisting developers develop affordable housing for all of the different levels of entry into the housing market in our community. I think we don't have enough staff to deal with some of the poverty and the impacts of poverty in the streets of our community. I think the list goes on and on. So I believe that what leadership requires and what this body and this staff has done is prioritize. And we're doing the best we can. And we will never, as Mr. Mokaisi said, be doing perfectly. I'd also like to say that while Commissioner Buck has been magnanimous and has thanked us, I think all of us represent the entire county. I think all of us are concerned with the entire county. And in this particular crisis and fire, Commissioner Buck has been burdened. I've seen it occur as she was chair. I'm seeing it occur now, and I am seeing the resolute way in which she has responded and brought us all in. In fact, there were times when I was coordinating with the fire cooperators at her request, and there were times when Commissioner Bozovich, in fact, did the same thing. So we're all pitching in, we're all doing our best, and I don't think that this is a time for anything but moving forward as effectively and efficiently as possible. And if there are no further comments, and if someone wants to raise their hand, I'll be more than happy. But until I see that, I am going to move the question unless anyone wants to say anything further at this point. Okay, I think I'm delighted with this, the maker and the second, by the way. I think it's very, very appropriate for you both to be in the positions you're in on this motion. Commissioner Buck has moved Order 21-04-07-02 in the matter of adding 6 full-time FTE positions to Fund 570 within the Department of Public Works to prioritize and expedite permits necessary for Holiday Farm fire recovery efforts. Vice Chair Farr seconded that motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Let the record show that Order 21-04-07-02 was approved by this body unanimously, 5-0. This brings us to our last item in our day-and-a-half long meeting this week. 1C, Order 21-04-07-03 in the matter of adding 1 full-time staff person in Fund 570 within the Department of Public Works to support Lane County's FireWise program. Again, Mr. Hurley and Mr. Miller, if you would lead us through this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. This request is not something that was discussed at the work session last week. This request for an additional FTE would add a land management technician to further support the county's FireWise incentive program. I'll highlight that this is different than the previous request in that the county does currently have funding available for this position through federal Title III dollars. There's a very limited range of uses that money can be spent on. One of the uses is to promote activities in the Community FireWise program. The Land Management Division currently has 1 FTE assigned to that program. However, over the last year, because of COVID and the Holiday Farm fire, that program has been, frankly, that position, we pulled that position out of FireWise because that's not critical. You know, it's obviously a very important project, again, considering what has just occurred in the county, but we've actually been pulling that position to work on permits to help folks rebuild. And there's a need to add additional staff. The program is key in that it provides education and financial assistance to property owners to help them become more resilient to wildfire. And now isn't a time that we want to take away from that. We want to double down on that program and provide more assistance to the community. The addition of 1 FTE would do that. Happy to answer any questions.
Do any commissioners have any questions on this item or comments? I see none, Mr. Miller. If there are none, is there a motion? Commissioner Buck.
I'll move approval of order 21-04-07-03 as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Please note, Chair, that I delayed my second.
So noted. It has been moved by order 21-04-07-03 in the matter of adding 1 full-time FTE in Fund 570 within the Department of Public Works to support Lane County's FireWise program has been moved by Commissioner Buck and seconded by Commissioner Farr. Is there discussion to the motion? Go. Well, in that event, the chair will call for a vote. All those in favor of order 21-04-07-03, moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Farr, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I apologize, Commissioner Bozovich, I couldn't hear or see you on that one. What was your vote?
I said aye.
I apologize. All those opposed, same sign. Let the record show that order 21-04-07-03 was approved unanimously by this body with a vote of 5-0. Is there any other business, Mr. Mokrahajski, for us at this juncture before we adjourn? Yes, sir.
Yes, I want to thank Keir and Dan for their work on this. And if you don't mind, I have maybe under other business, one other item to bring to you. I've been so quiet and haven't chewed up any of the airtime today. I thought maybe I would insert myself with something new for you to do.
We have a different recollection of your participation.
Yes, I was being sarcastic. So I did yesterday received a request from the Eugene Civic Alliance at Civic Park. They're requesting a letter of support from the board or from the county and they have an April 15th deadline for federal funding through the Economic Development Initiative that's they're saying is part of the infrastructure bill before Representative DeFazio's committee. We have a little work to do because I talked to Mr. Kyler about this and he's not he has a different understanding of what bill is in front of Congressman DeFazio's office. So we would have a little bit of background to do, but I thought I would share with you that back in 2017, the board of, actually the chair at the time, Commissioner Farr was the chair, sent a letter on behalf of the board supporting, it says offering enthusiastic support for Eugene Civic Alliance's proposal to seek state funding from the 2017 Oregon legislature to support its efforts to revitalize the former Civic Stadium site. So it was a support letter for state funding for lottery-backed bonds, which they ultimately received. And now you see what's happened at that site. Of course, it has been improved. There is some final work that they're looking to do there to complete that overall project. And they're again asking for a support letter from the board. So I would pitch it to the board and say, if you would like to support that, I think what I would ask is that we either get head nods or ideally a motion to allow the chair of the board to sign a letter of support for potentially state and federal funding to complete that project. Gives us a little bit of flexibility to sort of work through the nuances, draft some language, and have Chair Bernie sign it. But of course, the policy question for the board is just, you know, do you feel comfortable supporting that effort?
Commissioner Trieger was the first to have her hand up.
Thank you,
I was going to
Chair.
point to.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I just wanted to say, as we just said in the previous agenda item, we do all serve the whole county, but as the person for whom this is really sort of one of the heart centers of my district, this property and this project, and it's sort of ironic, this is on the heels of another discussion about an area devastated by fire, of course, very different circumstance and different outcomes, but to the point that our county administrator made earlier, disasters happen and let's not waste them. What I've seen transform on that property, the community partnerships that have come together, the resource that has become for the whole community, particularly for youth in our community, is just something I am absolutely excited to do whatever we can to support the continued redevelopment of that property and that project. It's so critically important to my district, to this whole community, and really feeds into so many of our strategic plan goals and areas around vibrant communities and healthy families and robust economic development as well, because of the new infrastructure and resource that property now is for the whole community. So I am fully in support and would be happy to do whatever is necessary to write that letter and support that letter. And thank you so much for bringing it forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Farr, I'm sorry.
Nothing, Chair Bernie. I was going to ask for Commissioner Trieger to speak, but I didn't have to ask. So.
Oh, okay. Yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
So as much as I support the development of Civic, and I supported asking the state for bond money to support the project, which is a different source of funding, the infrastructure bill should be about public works regarded as essential and not supplied by private enterprise. I can't put Civic Stadium reconstruction into an infrastructure bill. The infrastructure bill is more than 2/3 non-infrastructure spending. I don't support the bill. I don't support asking for that bill to support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other commissioners that would like to weigh in at this point? Commissioner Buck.
As someone with a little one who I hope will be able to participate in significant, fun events at this location, I think it's at the heart of what makes our city in our county a wonderful place to live for our kids. We're coming out of a pandemic, hopefully very soon. We want our kids out there thriving, exercise. As in any capital project, there are construction costs, infrastructure costs that are associated with this, and I am very supportive of the request.
Commissioner Farr, I could not tell. Were you wanting to speak, sir?
No, Chair, I was just unmuting.
Mr. Mokraheisi, how many public dollars went into this thus far?
I don't know that I have the exact, if I gave you a number, I would be guessing, and I don't want to do that. I believe it was several $1 million from the state, that supported that. There was private fundraising as well, and then some insurance funding. A couple of clarifications I want to make there. They are saying April 15th is the deadline for submission. You don't have a board meeting next week, so that's why if you wanted to do something. I appreciate Commissioner Bozovich's comments, and I think it's a little unclear is the actual funding source. I asked Mr. Kyler to look into this, and he's actually saying that it's not an infrastructure bill that's in front of Congressman DeFazio's desk. It's actually the committee. It's actually the surface transportation reauthorization, but the civic project wouldn't fit into the transportation bill. He's saying there is an annual appropriations bucket called EDI. It's Economic Development Initiative through the Housing and Urban Development through HUD. And Congressman DeFazio could submit an earmark request for that resources. So that's different than the infrastructure bill. We've been told in amounts not to exceed 1.5 million. It's also important to know that one of our United Front initiatives is, I'm just giving you this all for context. One of our United Front initiatives is to make a request to that pool of resources, EDI funds, for wraparound services at the MLK at Commons. So it's a funding for the wraparound services to support the folks who are living at our 51 unit MLK Commons. So there was, I know Mr. Kyler was just, a little bit, had some concerns about not having competing interests on that front. And so I'm sorry, I wish I could give you a little bit more like definitively, well, here's where, but this all the request came to us yesterday, and it's a little unclear exactly what would be requested, where the funding, but they did indicate Economic Development Initiative funds is what they're going after. So that's the request I received directly from Civic Alliance. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of context, and I guess I'll put it back to you to say, what would you like to do? If you are interested in pursuing it, what I would suggest is you give staff and the chair sort of the direction to say, look into this further. And this is just my suggestion to you. Look into this further, and if it doesn't create a conflict, and you deem it doesn't create a conflict with other funding that we're going after, this part of sort of a community-wide housing homelessness initiative, then go ahead and do that. But maybe if there is a conflict, that we would pause.
Yes, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to suggest exactly that we do give staff the authority, so to speak, to move forward on this, and also give you the ultimate go ahead to sign it, Chair Bernie, based upon some of the conditions that Mr. Mokrajewski stated. I'd like to point out that it has nothing to do with the earmarking that we talked about last week that Mr. Kyler brought forward to us, that we had some discussion regarding. This is a separate thing. Creating a hub for that kind of activity exactly in that location is a benefit to all of the county. It really is. And in fact, the property is still, as far as I know, in public ownership. It's still owned by the city of Eugene, even though it's being developed by private nonprofits. And I'd like to say that the leveraging of the facilities that's been provided by government jurisdictions, the city and the county both, has helped help private industry make decisions to support some of the programs that are existing at the property. I'd like to point out that close to 30 years ago, for instance, Jerry, this is prior to this, of course, but the ongoing kind of commitment that we have from local private entities, Jerry's made a commitment to put Jerry's name on all kids sports uniforms and support kids sports for the long haul. And as far as I know, their name is still there. Private industry supports the leverage provided by government in this instance. I'm in support of giving you the authority, and Chair Bernie ultimately giving you the authority to make the signature.
Further discussion? Commissioner Bozovich?
I just, I appreciate the clarification because the initial lead into this made it sound like it was coming from the infrastructure bill. That said, now we're talking about moving ahead with a competing interest to our MLK Commons project. I just can't see that this is a higher priority. I also can't see justifying federal taxation of folks in Florence to pay for something that benefits South Eugene. I'm sorry, but this is not countywide significance. I can't support this.
Are there any other comments? Before we ask for a head nod, I would like to say that in my fledgling understanding of some of these things, I seem to recall that there was a pot of money that the civic and other activities were funded from that went through the county. And I vaguely recall, as I was campaigning, which seems like yesterday, but it wasn't, that every one of those investments was homed in the city of Eugene. And one of the things that I was suggesting was, well, in terms of equity, maybe we ought to look at where some of these investments in fact occur, because while the justification or rationale might be something is available for everyone in the county, oftentimes when the rubber hits the road, that's not quite exactly correct. So I have no problem moving forward, but let me tell you what my problem is. I feel that we are in a moment where right now we are discussing as a board a request that came in yesterday for something that's not on our agenda. There's been no staff analysis. Consequently, the analysis that's been shared with us has been a bit elucidated by texts to try and get a handle of it. And I just feel we're about to enter a period where this is going to happen more and more. It already happened, people elected and not that are in the know where resources are going to be scrambling. And I just hope that this body will really, truly try and be the moderator of fairness, and both position Lane County to benefit from more than our share of resources for our people, and at the same time, be an arbiter of true fairness for everyone. So having said that, I could have guessed this was going to occur. Yes, Commissioner Budd.
I just want to remind everybody that the programs that they do at this facility do outreach to other communities in Lane County. They do programs for low-income students, for example, in Cottage Grove and other outlying communities. So the service provided is countywide. It just happens that they rebuilt in this particular location in downtown Springfield because of the fire at that location and the opportunity that presented at the time.
Downtown Eugene, Commissioner?
Excuse me?
Did you mean downtown Eugene?
Well, it's near South Eugene.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But it presented an opportunity for them to rebuild a bigger, stronger program that does serve other areas of our community, not just South Eugene.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Trieger?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to amplify what Commissioner Buck said, the other benefit of not to turn this into a what's so great about kids sports, but they're also developing some really important cutting edge and nationally researched work around physical literacy that is shared with other organizations and school districts all over the country and certainly all over the county. So it's an important organization, as I said, that meets a lot of our goals as in our strategic plan countywide. I wanted to ask for a point of clarification from our county administrator. My understanding was that what we would be approving, should we do so, is staff moving forward to drafting a letter that is contingent, the submission of which is contingent upon learning more about whether in fact we would be asking for a funding resource that would be in conflict with something more directly tied to one of our own programs. And if that conflict is in fact determined to be in place, we would reconsider whether to offer this letter. Do I have that right?
That was what I suggested, given I appreciate that I kind of led, because the request was saying economic development initiative that is part of the infrastructure bill. And I think at least our staff assessment is that's not accurate. And so I think it inevitably causes confusion for all of you, as it does for me, about which is it EDI or is it infrastructure. So we need to dig into that a little bit. That was my suggestion, is that you give us, now the issue is the timing aspect, that they're saying April 15th is the deadline for submission of these letters of support for that federal funding. You don't meet next week. So if you authorize, you're kind of authorizing us to draft a letter and potentially for the chair to sign it, but using some discretion on if we feel like it isn't going to be in conflict, if it's money, if you're sending a support letter that is supporting funding for this project at Civic, but we're also, as part of a united front effort, Eugene, Springfield, LTD, LCOG, all of our united front partners, we're all pursuing wraparound funding for wraparound services at MLK, and we think that creates a conflict. We wouldn't send the letter. What that creates, though, is it means we would not come back to you, right? You wouldn't. We can send you a message, right? We can email the board and let you know, but you don't have a board meeting before that. So that's what I'm suggesting, is and I'm suggesting you do this just as an assignment. If there are 3 head nods, do it as an assignment. Direct us that way to give us that sort of discretion, and know that the letter may or may not go based on, your faith and trust in us that we're going to be able to determine what is or is not a conflict. The only thing I'll add is, you asked about how much money. The request previously was $6 million in state lottery-backed dollars. I believe that was approved. So it was around $6 million in state lottery-backed dollars that we supported previously. City of Eugene, City of Springfield mayor sent a letter supporting, as did others in the community.
Commissioner Farr, and then Commissioner Trieger.
I just wanted to thank you for that clarification and say that I would be fully, personally, speaking for myself, I would be comfortable with giving that direction to draft a letter and to only submit it if it's determined by county administrator and his team that it is not in direct conflict with an ask from that same pot of money that we might be making for direct county services. And the only thing I would add is just that we ensure that we express to the Kids Sports Organization, if we are not able to provide that letter, that is the sole reason.
Well, I was ready to at least shake my head yes, until I realized, no, this is really a referendum on our trust of the county administrator. Now this creates a whole other opportunity. Just kidding, Mr. Mokerheisky. So I have one additional question, if I may. What happens if between April 7th today and April 15th, which seems to be a general deadline for this resource, the county receives other requests for letters of support?
Mr. Chair, you bring up a really good point, and I appreciate you making this comment earlier, a couple minutes ago. You're right. I mean, this is the challenge that we inevitably are going to face. There's all kinds of really important, great projects that the board is likely to support from organizations outside of Lane County, and there's federal money that is available for a lot of these things, and so. I don't think I can give you a good answer other than to say, if those requests come forward, what I would do is have a conversation with the chair and determine, is it worthy of an emergency meeting of the board, or do we wait till the next board meeting, which is, I would prefer the latter. And then I will, so we would just have to sort of work that. The bigger picture piece of this, as I indicated yesterday, we have a meeting, we're meeting with our leadership on Friday morning. I've invited the chair of the board as a liaison to the board to that discussion to really walk through what we understand about the American Rescue Plan. And what we're going to try to do, the executive team in the organization, is to pull together, based on your strategic plan, your legislative principles and priorities, and other things the board has already stated, what would be essentially some priorities and principles to give staff the same kind of flexibility to go and pursue applying for funding through these different pools of resources. We still would have to come back to the board, right, for specific items, but we need some flexibility, right, to be able to really address. And I mean, this is a concern we all have, is there's all of this federal dollars that through the ARP and the infrastructure plan, and it's going to pass us by unless we're ready to go and seize the opportunity. So I just want to say that because what you said, Chair, is absolutely right. We're going to contend with a lot of this, and we're going to have a framework. We're going to need to be clear about what the board's principles, priorities, and expectations are. So we don't have to come to you every 5 minutes and ask your permission for what do we need to do. We need you to sort of, you remember the destination thing. You tell us the destination where you want to get to, and then we'll figure out the best path to get you there. So that is our plan, and it's going to take probably a few weeks here for us to pull all that together and come back to you and say, okay, here's what we think is basically what you would want to support in terms of principles and priorities. How do you want to adjust that? And then you approve that, and then we kind of have the guiding principles that we use in our legislative priorities and through our strategic plan. So that's the long answer to, I think, where we ultimately need to get to.
I was going to try and wrap this up, but yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Just very briefly, thank you, Chair. I really appreciate that, County Administrator. I look forward to hearing that, that recommendation. And I just wanted to add that our first priority, of course, should be securing and leveraging federal dollars to this organization. But any federal dollars that we can help leverage to this community writ large, not just to Lane County as an organization, is a benefit to the community that we serve and ultimately also to this organization. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I look forward to a discussion with you, with the new mix on this board, because just for the sake of it, I would have reversed those because I didn't run necessarily to be the guardian of an institution. I'm looking for money to get to community groups and to businesses and to others out in our community, not necessarily secondary to getting money to the county, but as a government. But that's just me. Listen, I'm gonna call for head nods at this point, if that would be okay on this item. All those in favor of whatever Mr. Mokrohysky said. Anyone want to paraphrase that? Really, 25 words or less? Steve, can you?
Well, I'll try. But those last few words don't count, right?
I knew I was lighting a fire, but no, those last few words don't count on this particular item.
An assignment directing staff and the board chair to research and draft a letter that potentially could be submitted to state or federal authorities in support of funding for completion of the civic park project, as long as it is not in conflict. Supporting that project is not in conflict with other already established priorities by the board going after similar funds. A little convoluted.
No, perfect. Thank you. All those in favor of allowing that to occur, nod your heads. Okay, I see 4 head nods. So thank you very much. Mr. Mokrohysky, other commissioners, is there anything else for the good of the order? Our next scheduled Board of Commissioner meetings begin Tuesday, April 20th. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.